Welcome to Tales from the Trenches Tuesdays. Today it is my absolute honor to have Malcolm Burrows with us.
Here's a story of a fundraiser who was launching his very own web show. Each episode is very short due to edits, so it can really flow. Here's a story of a podcast guest star who was busy raising money of their own. They were each great in their own way, fundraising in zone. Till the one day when Jack asked a guest to join him, and they knew it was much more than a jest, that these guests must somehow form a resource. That's the way they all became the podcast guests. The podcast guests, the podcast guests. That's the way they became the podcast guests.
Malcolm is a philanthropic advisor and gift planner with over 34 years of experience. He's the head of Philanthropic Advisory Services at Scotia Wealth Management. He founded and leads Aqueduct Foundation, a public foundation with donor-advised funds. Aqueduct is the 13th largest foundation in Canada by assets and has granted over $766 million to registered charities since its inception almost 20 years ago. He also leads Scotia Wealth Management's 100-year-old private foundation services practices. Before joining Scotia, he worked for three major Toronto charities from 1990 to 2004 and started his career in the arts. Malcolm is an active educator, writer, and volunteer in the charitable sector and wealth planning community. Through the Canadian Association of Gift Planners, he has contributed to the development of new charitable tax incentives, including the elimination of capital gains on gifts of public securities and the estate donation rules. His proposal for gifts of private securities and taxable real estate, published by C.D. Howe Institute, was included in the 2015 federal budget. He was CAGP's course director from 1999 to 2011 and is a member of the Government Relations Committee. So, welcome, Malcolm.
Thanks, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wow, that is quite the list of accomplishments. You've definitely been in the, some people call it planned giving. I hate that phrase. I think that any meaningful gift is a planned gift. But you've definitely been in the, let's say, unique or deferred giving world for quite some time now.
It's at this point, it's probably my calling, 30 plus years. So I very much grew up with the community. It's been terrific.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that journey, about how fundraising has changed over the last little bit and how you think it's going to be changing as we go forward.
Oh, it's a great question. Massively. I couldn't have imagined when I started back in 1990 that the charitable community would change and evolve this way. You think back to that time, I was fortunate. I was working at the University of Toronto as initially a reluctant communications officer, as it was called, which is I was the whole marketing communications group as a new employee at the University of Toronto, and I came kicking and screaming. Didn't want to be a fundraiser. There was no way, no how, but it seemed like a good gig at the time, and I was wrong. A wonderful space to be in, and a space that was really beginning to take off in so many ways. So my first task at the time was to do all of the communications work first for University of Toronto's first planned giving program. And then my second task was to communicate the revised endowment policy of the University of Toronto. So all of which is to say that it was there was some really fundamental work happening there at the time, and it was a completely different world from a fundraising perspective. So.
Yeah. I think that there's this huge intergenerational transfer of wealth that everyone is talking about. And in Canada, the number of gift vehicles we have is relatively limited as opposed to our friends down south in the States. They can, do IRA rollovers, and, DAFs are a huge, big thing. And charitable remainder trusts can be funded with properties and other, neat things. But the reality is 90% of the deferred gifts are bequests, right? There might be some life insurance thrown in. How do you think that the charities are kind of reacting to this huge transfer of wealth? We see these huge gifts being made across the country, which are just so inspirational. But do you think that it's just happenstance, or is it actually planned to work out that way?
Well, I think there's a lot of underlying factors. Vehicles, yes, that's been a contributor. In some ways, the U.S. has a richer toolkit. In some ways, we have a better one. Ours is probably simpler and more supportive and enabling. But and we talked about this going back 30 years. We were speculating, we were fantasizing about this so-called wealth transfer. And we're on the second one right now because it's really more focused on the baby boomers at this point. But what we've seen is a significant shift in the world of giving. And I think there's sources of concern, obviously, particularly with the number of regular donors is decreasing. So when I started out back in 1990, about 30% of Canadians actually gave a donation and claimed it on their tax return each year. And it's now down to low 17%. So that collapse of the regular pool of donors, and yet the value of donations continues to increase. And so in the world of fundraising, of course, we focused on gift planning, we focused on major gifts, and we've seen this shift. But what's driving it from an underlying perspective is wealth concentration, demographics, people are living longer, family sizes are smaller as well. The average size of the Canadian family over a 50-year period is being cut in half. And many more Canadians that don't have kids at all. So all of these are factors in terms of driving these asset donations that we really started to push back in the 90s, 2000s. And so it's all coming together right now, but there's some underlying concerns about that because of the fundamental inequity that it represents. So,
yeah, definitely. It's interesting. The boomers are going to be inheriting all this wealth, and the boomers are the most successful cohort in history, right? So I'm a Gen X. I'm right behind the boomers. I'm not going to be as successful as the boomers from a statistical standpoint. Individuals, right, maybe, whatever. But as a cohort, the boomers are the ones that are, the creme de la creme. They're going to be inheriting all this money as their folks pass on. And the reality is as a cohort, they don't need that money. So I guess maybe there's an opportunity to do something good with that, unless they want their charity of choice to be Revenue Canada.
Well, I think so. I would actually say that for the most part, the boomers have already received those inheritances. If sort of the older boomers are now pushing, in their late 70s. And sort of a cohorts were born in the late 50s, so kind of mid 60s. A lot of them have already received inheritances, but they've also, you're right, they've benefited from all sorts of economic wins, and that's so you do have this wealth concentration, and engaging them, ensuring that they that they share that wealth with the community is, I think, really essential.
Right. Well, it's interesting. You've kind of played on both sides of the fence, right? You've been on the fundraising side, and you've been on the corporate side with Scotia. And one of my things that I've always found challenging is the fact that so many financial planners don't do what's best for the client. They do what's easiest for them because there's no incentive for them to do any extra work, right? When you're kind of paid with assets under management, you kind of go for the simplest and you just try to get as much volume as. Do I have that kind of summarized correctly? And if so, what can we do about it?
I mean, there's danger, always a danger in making generalizations. But
Right.
across the spectrum of the industry, there are those that just essentially follow the trailers and worried about getting paid, and they don't want to lose assets. At the other end, there's those that are values aligned, supportive of their clients, and that, they take a much larger view. Often I find, actually, paradoxically, the ones that are most supportive of philanthropy consistently are the ones that are more successful. So they end up being values aligned personally, they find values aligned clients, and it's a virtuous circle. And they have successful businesses, so they're less worried. They define it less in terms of, a $1 in, $1 out, and more these lifelong relationships. That's where I tend to focus our work, is really getting the clients that have that, the advisors and the clients that have that holistic, grounded perspective. So in my practice, I don't really focus a lot on, even though I have a gift planning background, I'm not, I focus on what people have. I focus on the estate plan. I focus on major transitions like business sales. And less in terms of products. Like, it's not about life insurance. It's not about, or even flow-through shares or something like that. I'm less concerned about that and more about that values grounding and support for giving. And I find that that's where it works the best. And so it's a question of really picking who you partner with. So,
Malcolm, this has been absolutely amazing. I love chatting with you. I've heard you speak dozens of times. I can recall once here in Ottawa, I remember giving you a lift out to the airport after you spoke somewhere. If folks wanted to get hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
Oh, just one of the best ways at this point is just through LinkedIn. I mean, send me a request. Anybody from the sector becomes a connection on LinkedIn. I really think it's important, and I have a lot of channels that open up, lots of chats, and as I said, I'm constantly learning from sector colleagues. It's so important to me. The worst thing that I could do is, I'm literally in a large tower right now that's having power problems because of the large summer rainstorm, but in a large tower in downtown Toronto. And it's so important to have that connection, to have the colleagues, to have these different experiences. And so I always, every week, I spend time with colleagues from the sector. I'm learning, I'm finding out what they do. Sometimes we're able to help with funding and things like that. But if I don't have that ongoing engagement, if I don't have that ongoing learning, one of my great fears in life is to become a fogey. I don't want to be a fogey. And I would need that connection with my colleagues in the sector as a result.
Malcolm, this has been absolutely amazing. And I thank you so much for coming on.
Well, Jack, thanks for the invitation. It's just been great. I really appreciate it.
Hi, folks. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button right here.